Good evening, everyone. I, Ray Prakash, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India, welcomes you all to our special weekly program of MNT News Network. First of all, I welcome our distinguished special guest this evening, Professor Stephen Barne, who is Associate Dean, Penn State University, Pennsylvania. He is a distinguished academician who has the global experience of higher education. Professor Steve oversees LLM, SJD, and pre-LLM admission at the Penn State University, Pennsylvania. Steve has a very wide range of experience as he has served for nearly 8 years in China, where he was an honorary law professor at the China University of Political Science and Law in Beijing. Welcome, Professor Stephen Barne. As we all know that for today's discussion, the topic is of immense importance, particularly in the backdrop of COVID-19, which has halted the entire system of education, particularly in a country like India. So the importance of the topic for today's evening is the importance of diversity in education. We hope and we sincerely hope that with the vast experience of Professor Stephen Barne, our audience will be benefited from his discussions and the inputs which he will be disseminating over the next 30 minutes in this program. So once again, I welcome you, Professor. Welcome to the MNT News Network. Namaste. Professor, the very first question, why do you think that the maintaining diversity is important for the educational institution or the system of education across the globe, irrespective of the country which is governed by the liberal constitutional principles or the country which has one party system or an autocratic system? According to you, why the diversity attains an importance in the educational system across the globe?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Rakesh, for having me share some ideas and thoughts with you. You know, it's in the area of law, it's almost cliche when we talk about the globalization of law, or we talk about the rule of law. But what does that really mean in a textbook? Well, you don't really know what it means in a textbook or in a casebook until you engage with other people. And what I found in my 15, 20 years of experience in international legal education, it's only by being there, or it's only by students coming here that we really interface, we interact. It's this notion or this idea, which I hold, that law reflects society and society reflects law, or law reflects culture and culture reflects law. So it's all fine and good to read about the Indian Constitution in the United States or in Uganda or in Norway or in Spain, but you have to be in India if you want to see how the Constitution really works. And I would suggest it's the same thing for the Indian law student. You can read Marbury versus Madison, you know, the seminal case of judicial review from the early 1800s, but you don't know what judicial review is until you are engaging with the everyday person in the United States. And that doesn't mean that the everyday person in the United States is going to have a commentary about Marbury versus Madison or even about judicial review, but you see law in practice. And so I think it's really important now that the lawyer in training, or even the senior lawyer, that she or he engages with viewpoints around the world. They might be popular, they might be unpopular, they might be majority opinions or minority opinions, but that's how we get to understand one another, and that's what makes the field of law so dynamic.
As we see and understand that you have traveled across the globe, and particularly this East Asian region, where the two of the major populous country of the world is located. The China, where you have a working experience of 8 years out of your career, and you have traveled India also extensively and on numerous occasions, and perhaps I believe that you travel every year to India. Even during the COVID, you have traveled. So kindly illuminate us or kindly elucidate us on the what should be the system of what should be the system what the how do you devise the system of education, particularly higher education, so that it becomes more realistic and more rooted in the socio-economic realities of a particular country? As you have discussed right now, just told that the law reflects the society and the society gets reflected in the legal system particularly. So with your vast experience, what should be the system and how do we democratize the system of higher education or the access to higher education in a country like India? What should be the tools and design for that?
Yeah, so Mr. Prakash, you cite my experience in China where I lived as a professor and a lawyer director for 8 years. And I, over the last 7 or 8 years, I think I averaged 6 to 8 weeks each year in India. And I've been from, obviously from Delhi to Mumbai to Ahmedabad, but even as far away as Agartala. The thing I always tell students, I mean this sincerely from the heart, and it's not just because I'm wearing a Nehru jacket, it's this: when I'm in India, I feel at home. And the students and faculty colleagues kind of smile as if I'm being funny. Says, no, and I really feel like I'm home. And one of the reasons why I feel like I'm home is that when I turn on the television, I will see dozens and dozens of channels about political content where people are vociferously arguing points of policy. You see the diversity of political opinion in the public forum, and to me that's welcoming. The noise of politics, the noise and the diversity of points of view, and to me that is the true sign of a democracy. Now, there are many countries where I travel to where it's quiet. You turn on a news channel, you might only have one or two news channels, or in the case of China, it's censored. And so, in my view, the goal of higher education in this notion of diversity is to welcome all opinions out into the forum, whether they be popular or unpopular, or whether they are minority opinions or majority opinions. It's the only way we learn. And we only understand how we're advancing when we understand the whole swath of opinions. And that's why I think the goal of higher education, wherever it might be, is to welcome those different opinions. That's where diversity is so important. That's what a university education is all about. And that's what the law embraces. I mean, we're always seeking justice. And who are the persons who are seeking justice? It's usually the minorities who faced injustice. And that's the reason why those people in particular need to be sitting at the table or sitting at the desk or sitting in the lecture hall, whether it be in India or the United States or anywhere else they might be. So I think noise is good. I think a little bit of messiness in the lecture hall is good as we welcome all these different opinions. And that's the great differentiation between India and China, in my view. India has, I don't know, something like it's got a few 100 million people more than China. China's quiet. Everyone seems to embrace the system. They don't. But in India, there's that public forum, whether it be in the university, whether it be on the news channels. I think it's healthy. And it's the way we advance as a society, is to hear all of the opinions.
So, taking cue from your just concluded answers, particularly that the free and open discussion and the debate in the society is one of the virtue of a democratic society, a country governed by the democratic principles or the constitutional principles. Now, uh, uh, just to put it very differently, Indian Constitution particularly prescribed and safeguards as fundamental rights for the backward class of society and the marginalized section of the society, particularly the minorities, be it the religious minorities or the linguistic minorities. Article 15, 16, 29, and 30 of the Indian Constitution specifically protects the right of education, particularly the right of admission into the educational institutions with regard to the backward class of citizens under Article 15, and it especially protects, guarantees the right to the minorities, linguistic and religious minorities, to establish and administer the educational institution in India. So this is one of the system which we popularly called as reservation system in India. That constitution gives a kind sense of protected, guaranteed rights in favor of backward class of society, backward who are historically oppressed because of the caste system or the existing social structure which was there in India before the promulgation of Constitution of India. So similarly, we see that the United States also follows a principle of affirmative action or the reservation system in favor of blacks or the other minor marginalized communities in higher education. Do you see a similarity? And how do you assess the system of reservation in India and giving a sense of affirmative action in United States in higher education? What is your assessment about it? Does it
Yes.
promote democratic principles? Does it enhance the participation and brings quality to the table, or you also have a view that it compromises with the basic notion of merit? Because
Yes.
when we talk about merit, it's the very basic question which underpins in it, that whether you have given an equal opportunity to the marginalized section and they have got a chance to prove their merit or not. Because terming less meritorious to those section of people or to those students who have not even got a chance to get admission or a study in a particular higher education or quality higher to get the quality higher education, how can you term them less meritorious? So the very idea of equal opportunity also assumes importance in it. So what are your reflections on these aspects?
Sure. I'm familiar with the reservation system as it attaches itself to enrollment in universities in India. I'm not an expert, but I'm familiar with the system. But you mentioned the word affirmative action in the context of higher education in the United States, and not wanting to give a constitutional law lecture here to your listeners. In the 70s, early 80s, universities in the United States had something similar to a reservation system where there was a quota. X percent of seats in an entering class would be of color, could be African American, could be Latino, could be Asian, and so forth. But there was a particular Supreme Court case which was decided. It's called Baki versus Regents of California. In this case, it was a Caucasian, a white male who had top marks, top experience, top flight. And he was denied admission at the University of California in one of the medical schools. And Mr. Baki's complaint was, look, I'm top 1%. And the other people who were admitted, who enrolled, had far lower marks than I did. That's unfair. That's reverse discrimination, or basically using your words, Mr. Prakash, in a sense, he's saying, like, I've merited this. The others didn't. And this eventually made it to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court, in its majority opinion, essentially agreed with the University of California in its ideals or objectives to have diversity, to give persons of the marginalized population greater opportunities to study. But the Supreme Court said the quota system doesn't work, that violates, in essence, the Equal Protection Clause. So what the Supreme Court basically said is, we understand um, the diversity goals. For example, in a medical school, if California is, let's say, 12% Latino Spanish speaking, there should be a reason why 10 or 12% of the medical doctors should be Spanish speaking or have grown up in those communities. But what the Supreme Court said is you can't have a quota system, but instead the admissions officers can take race, ethnicity as a particular component in an admissions decision. So let me put it modernly. What that means at a place like Penn State University, we can't say 12% of all seats are reserved for African Americans, 7% are reserved for Asian, 14% are reserved for Latinos. But instead, what we can do is on an admissions questionnaire on the application, students can or applicants can volunteer their race or their demographics, and we can take that in consideration. So modernly, what we at universities are doing in the US is we don't have a quota, but the students and the academies expect diversity. So without a quota system, we're essentially doing the same thing, but without a quota, but we're placing value on diversity. And that's exactly what we do at Penn State.
Professor, I see over the years, particularly you as an institution builder, particularly the role you are performing in the capacity of associate dean for the when you where you are coordinating the international admission, particularly, and particularly the kind of travel and the encouragement you provide uh, to the countries like India, Vietnam, or the East Asian countries, particularly, where you encourage the students or the institutions to get and enroll into the higher education system of United States, particularly your university. So it reflects upon the very idea that you believe in inclusion, equal opportunity, and access to quality higher education.
But
I'm
I would just
this
stop here. You're giving me too much credit. It's in our self-interest to have diversity because the Indian students, the Pakistani students, the students from Panama, from Brazil and Argentina, they make us a better university because they bring points of view that we're not familiar with, that we should be familiar with. And I think that's the essence of a good institution is that you embrace diversity not always because it's the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do, but you make yourself a better knowledge base. And so, I completely subscribe to this notion of diversity from the idea of equal opportunity, but selfishly, an institution can say, we are better. We have better academics. We have better discussions because of diversity. So it's a little bit self-serving as well.
so that
Equal opportunity, but selfishly, an institution can say, we are better. We have better academics. We have better discussions because of diversity. So it's a little bit self-serving as well.
so that diversity always encourages and always brings a lot of points, and particularly it enriches the discussion. So
Absolutely.
particularly
We are a better university
you are a
because
better university when you get the admission
because of
from.
diversity. I mean, our law school, we have some 700 or 800 students total, 150 now are international. We are a better law school for having those 150 students. So hopefully they get some value or knowledge, but we also take the knowledge from them.
So what are the so the very next question, what are your suggestions for the Indian education system, particularly the university and the schools, to have to devise out the formula for to have more diversity, to give more equal opportunity the to the marginalized section, or to the individuals who cannot afford? Do you see the economic impediments in accessing to the higher education? Because I know you and your university offers generously the scholarship to the various students, particularly when it comes to the higher education. So do you see that the very cost of higher education is getting higher with each passing day, and that is one of the main obstacle in accessing the higher education?
Indeed, I think we can agree higher education sometimes needs higher costs and higher expenses. So, at least on the Penn State law side, we go to great lengths to ensure that qualified candidates have access. And the way we assess scholarships is essentially by number one, academic marks, number two, professional or volunteer experience, third, the financial needs as represented by the candidate. And the fourth, I call it the great other. What's that other thing that the student brings to the table? Was the student an advocate for the LGBTQ community? Was the student involved in grassroots level helping people from the marginalized societies? Those all four play equal parts. Unfortunately, even in the United States, public education is a high proposition. Like, for example, I have three children of my own, and just like me, the generation up, they all had part-time work experience when they were in school. We were washing dishes, we were working as a barista at a coffee shop or whatever. The one thing I would say that's, and I say this with great humility, and and I could be off here. I think the one thing that happens in the United States is that almost all students who are in university have had summer work experience, or they're working while they're in university or in college. And from the limited profile I've had of India over the last 7 or 8 years, it seems that most students are encouraged by their parents, study more, study more, study more, study more, and we'll fund your studies. Don't worry about the work. But the thing I encourage all students is all work is noble. And I don't care what the hourly pay is or what the compensation is. I do think that work experience is vital. And when it comes to, I think one thing, it shows the independence of a candidate. If they're applying for a scholarship, it basically means that she or he is saying, I've done everything I can. I've even worked at my uncle's and aunt's grocery store. I've worked in the fields, or I worked collecting tokens at a subway station or whatever. That shows the commitment. And also, I believe that when the student graduates, they've learned some personal and leadership skills. So I know I'm veering off the subject, but when we're talking about the higher cost of education, at least in the United States, there is that expectation that students have worked before they went to university or while they're at university to help fund their education. And I think that might be, if I might say, a lesson that could be learned in India. Somehow this idea that universities that might have higher costs, they should provide on-campus work opportunities for students. Because, if a law student is working in the canteen, or if the law student is working cleaning bathrooms, or whatever, I mean, that's what we do at Penn State. I believe that those things do make higher education more accessible. And when the institution embraces it, it's showing the value of work.
Professor, the very next question is uh, uh, pertains to the COVID-19 scenario. Particularly, it has impacted the entire globe and every aspect of the life of the human being. Particularly, what we have seen that somehow the system, the governance, and the system has rolled back with the vaccination, massive vaccination in United States or even in India. The worst impacted of the impact of the COVID-19 could be felt on higher education, particularly when it comes to India. And higher education, or even the education as an entire system, right from the schools to university, they have not reopened fully yet. Whereas what the experience and what the information says that United States closed down the university or closed down the schools, but for the least period of time. The universities and the schools were reopened with COVID protocol. Subsequently, with individual universities coming up with weekly testing or the bi-weekly testing of the COVID, and then the classes were conducted physically in person, and whosoever wants to conduct get through the online classes, in the United States universities, particularly the universities were open to that idea. However, what I gather that the US universities emphasized on physical classroom teaching a lot, even during the pandemic. Like 2021 session, most of the classes have been held in physical mode. Whereas in India, state universities or even the private universities are yet to fully reopen. How do you see the impact of this particular 2 years where then educational institutions were imparting digital or online education, and the very classroom interaction or the lively interaction was missing? Does it have an impact over the quality of education which a university should impart and overall?
Sure. First of all, I wish I could say that Penn State or the United States had some magic formula, or is that everyone was in compliance and that we came through COVID with in-person teaching better than anyone else because of some special thing we did. But we have to remind ourselves that India has 2 or 3 times the population that the United States has. So it's easier during a pandemic. Having said that, this is the only pandemic I've been through. Well, let's say, for example, Penn State. It's a small population, at least the city, about 120,000. One half are students. The students are spread throughout a very large area. So when they come to the classroom, they've had far more limited contact than they would, say, someone who lived in Delhi, and they're surrounded by millions, literally millions of people, and they come to the classroom. So I'm sympathetic to India's situation, how it approached it. In fact, I'm very impressed. I mean, for a country the size of India to have the vaccination rate it did, I believe that India's vaccination rate is even higher than that of the United States. So the Indian government was very successful, in my view, in terms of doing everything it could within the population. But when you're talking about the quality of education, I mean, at Penn State, for example, we were one semester only online. And at first, even the professors were reluctant because they wanted to be in person. There is something different about discussing and learning, in person as by Zoom. But they got over it and we got used to it. And then we went back, reverted to in-person teaching in the classroom, but with masks. I think it just kind of depends on the learner, on the faculty or the student, what happened over the last year and a half. I know of some situations where I've taught classes online where students were more engaged. It kind of felt like for some students that might have been on the more quiet side of things, they were more engaging on a Zoom than they were in person. So I've seen it kind of go both ways. But there's no doubt, and especially over the last, especially 6 or 8 months where I've been teaching full time in person in several different countries, there's no doubt that, learning is better in person than it is on a screen. But it's remarkable to see how some students and faculty responded and how even some students thrived on it. They actually did better on Zoom than they did even in person. So I think it's kind of a mixed results there.
Professor, you have traveled a large part of the world. What is your take on particularly India, especially comparing it in terms of equality and dignity of labor? Because you emphasized upon the working condition and the working opportunity for the students also. How do you see the equality and dignity aspect with reference to the labor scenario in India?
Well, um, without commenting directly on in India, because I really don't know labor law, even the United States, I'm not as well versed on as I should be, and I certainly don't know in the case of India. But if there's one thing that I will say about the country of my citizenship, the country of my passport, I mean, I've lived and traveled, 2/3 of my life around the world. The one thing I respect about this place I call my home country, the United States, is that it's all based on merit. It doesn't make any difference what university you went to. It doesn't make any difference what your last name is. It's becoming less relevant about your gender, and hopefully become even more irrelevant what your sexual orientation is. But it's this idea that if you perform and you produce results, you are rewarded. And I think that I even when I compare the United States against its sibling EU countries, or for example, where I am in Norway right now, in the United States, I I see much higher ceilings than I do elsewhere in the world. I mean, you think about Steve Jobs, didn't complete university, and he went to one semester at some small private college in Portland, Oregon, and he amassed a, not only a fortune, but he was a pioneer in this whole IT. So I think when you ask me a question about the labor situation in India, the indignity, I can only answer by my own experience in the United States with this notion of we need to we need to remove barriers that become disincentives for people to try. And we have to take off the labels of the meanings of last names or what institutions they graduate. I mean, if you went to Harvard or Yale, of course, more doors are going to be opening. But if you went to a third tier school like many CEOs did, we can't use that against them, but we have to give them a chance.
Professor, before we wind up, one of the last question which I would like to reflect upon, the contribution of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of Indian Constitution, particularly when it comes to the access to the higher education and the dignity principles which he has stood for and struggled for. Because as we all know that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar belonged to the one of the lower caste which were termed as untouchables in Indian scenario, and he went on to struggle, and whatsoever his life is full of a struggle, and he went on to one of the becoming the chairman of the drafting committee of Indian Constitution. So, what are your reflection on the dignity principles when it comes to the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as an academic scholar?
It's interesting, Mr. Prakash. Just like many other people outside of India, the personality who stands out in India is Gandhiji. That's our focus. That's who we know. If you were to ask any person outside of India, name a famous personality, Gandhiji is the one that comes out. It's the same thing in legal academics. And it wasn't until I spent more time in Gujarat that I learned that there was a person named Dr. Ambedkar and what he did. And as the father, I guess he's known as the father, he's revered as the father of India's constitution. And I'm reminded how his legal skills, and especially he had the legal skills, he just needed the opportunity to get an education. So he fought against the same system that he eventually tried to bring down with the Constitution. And I think, as I talk about Gandhiji, Gandhiji inspired Martin Luther King Jr. in civil disobedience. And if you want to understand Martin Luther King Jr., you have to understand Thurgood Marshall, who is the first justice on the United States Supreme Court who was African American, and what he did for the NAACP, what he did in these seminal cases in the United States to bring down the barriers for African Americans. So in some ways, I see this really close nexus between Gandhiji and Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Ambedkar and Thurgood Marshall. But the more and more I study Dr. Ambedkar, the more I realize that he might be, outside of India, the most how do I say it? He should have far more prominence. So I appreciate the question. Any more scholarship and more exposure about Dr. Ambedkar helps us better understand Gandhiji and helps us understand the role of law. And in our case, we're talking about legal education in terms of bringing justice not only to the classroom, but to the communities that we serve. No, but Dr. Ambedkar, he's a titan. He is a titan. And I don't think anyone can appreciate modern India or the Indian Constitution without having some familiarity with Dr. Ambedkar.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you all. Thank you for your illuminating us, particularly inputs and the kind of experience which you have shared on the subject matter of today's discussion, that is the importance of diversity in education, where I think our listeners and viewers will be much more benefited and will take cue from the when it comes to the designing of policy and implementing it at the education system or the higher education system, and how the your inputs about the how to increase the diversity and its benefits, as you have said that the with a representation from the 150 countries at the Penn State University, you are a better university. That makes you a better university. That makes you a better academics as well. So the diversity increases the discussion, it enriches the discussion, and it brings about the different point of views, particularly the experience and the points where then the monotonous group, which is called a higher as a closed circle group. So thank you once again for the joining this evening, and thank you for the lively discussion.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. And I finally just want to say this is it's not an institutionally, but the person who introduced me to you, Mr. Prakash, was one of our students, Abhishek Chauhan, who came from India, and he came to Penn State Law. So not only did he make the institution better with his voice, but I'm a better person and a better academician for having met Abhishek. So it happens at an institutional level, and it happens at a very personal level. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity it was to chat with you, and also for the introduction made by Abhishek.